The story of Archangel Michael is an epic chronicle of divine warfare, unwavering loyalty, and celestial betrayal that reverberates through all eternity. In a realm where perfection once reigned absolute, the impossible happened: rebellion in paradise itself. Have you ever wondered what it takes to draw your sword against those you once called brothers? Get ready for a narrative that will challenge your understanding of loyalty and justice as we explore the untold story of heaven's greatest warrior. Revelation 12 verse 7 unveils a cosmic conflict that predates humanity. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. Before this moment of cataclysmic confrontation, there was peace. Imagine an existence where discord was unthinkable, where every voice lifted in perfect harmony, where the very concept of opposition had no meaning. Yet into this crystalline perfection, something dark began to stir. In the beginning, before time had meaning and before the earth was formed from the void, God created the celestial hosts, beings of pure light and power, each with a purpose woven into their very essence. Among them stood the archangels, princes of heaven, and chief among them was Lucifer, the morning star, most beautiful of all creation. His radiance outshone the stars themselves, and his voice carried melodies that made the cosmos tremble with joy. But there was another, forged not for beauty alone but for an altogether different calling. Michael, whose very name posed the question that would define eternity: who is like God? The answer embedded in his name was both declaration and prophecy: none. He was created as heaven's defender, the captain of the Lord's host, the sword arm of divine justice. The contrast between these two archangels was evident from their very purpose. Lucifer embodied the glory of worship, the aesthetic perfection of creation, reflecting God's beauty back to him in dazzling displays of light and song. Michael, on the other hand, was strength incarnate, a warrior prince whose power existed not for spectacle but for protection, whose might served a single, unwavering purpose: the defense of the throne. As eternity unfolded, their differences became more pronounced. Lucifer basked in the adoration his beauty commanded, his voice leading the angelic choirs in worship that shook the foundations of heaven. Michael stood vigilant, his hand always near his sword, his eyes ever watchful, content in his role as guardian rather than star. This division of purpose created an invisible fault line that would later split paradise itself. Then came the turning point, a moment that seemed insignificant at first but carried consequences that would echo through all creation. Pride, that most insidious of poisons, took root in the heart of the light-bearer. Genesis of the thought was subtle: if I am so beautiful, so powerful, so essential to worship itself, who is like me? The question posed by Michael's name now had a challenger. Lucifer's beauty became his prison, his perfection the seed of his destruction. What began as a whisper of self-admiration grew into a roar of ambition: I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will make myself like the Most High. This moment reveals everything about the conflict to come. Lucifer, driven by pride and consumed by his own magnificence, was willing to trade his position in paradise for the illusion of supremacy. Michael, steadfast and immovable, saw with terrible clarity the choice before him: stand with the brother he had known since the dawn of creation, or stand with the God who created them both. While Lucifer's rebellion may seem incomprehensible by any rational measure, it demonstrates a profound truth about the nature of pride and the danger of mistaking gifts for rights. The morning star had forgotten that his light was reflected, not self-generated. He despised his position of service, seeing it as beneath his glory. For Michael, the implications were devastating. The rebellion was not merely a matter of cosmic politics, it carried the weight of brotherhood betrayed and the responsibility to defend the divine order. By choosing to rebel, Lucifer forced Michael's hand, transforming heaven's guardian from a symbol of protection into an instrument of judgment. This confrontation sets the stage for everything that follows in Michael's story. His loyalty and determination would lead him to unimaginable victory, but also place him in the unbearable position of becoming the hand that casts down those he once stood beside. Michael's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not against strangers, but against those we once loved, and that true strength is measured not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to do what must be done when all of heaven hangs in the balance. In the ages before the fall, Lucifer stood at the pinnacle of creation, second only to the throne itself. His wings caught light that had no earthly comparison, refracting it into colors that existed nowhere else in the cosmos. When he moved through heaven's courts, other angels paused in their duty simply to witness the spectacle of his passing. His voice, when lifted in worship, could make the very foundations of paradise resonate with harmony so pure they brought tears to the eyes of the seraphim. He was the sum of wisdom, the seal of perfection, the anointed cherub who covered the throne of God with the shadow of his wings. But perfection, when gazed upon too long, can become a mirror. And mirrors show only what stands before them. The change came so gradually that none could mark its beginning. Perhaps it started the first time Lucifer noticed how silence fell when he began to sing, how other angels positioned themselves to better see his radiance. Perhaps it was the 10,000th time he led worship and felt the weight of all heaven's attention upon him. The moment itself matters less than what grew from it, a question, small at first, barely a whisper in the depths of his consciousness, why do I bow when they bow to me? Michael noticed it first in the spaces between words, in the way Lucifer's prayers began to shift from holy are you to holy are we. In the way the morning star's eyes, once fixed upward toward the throne, began to linger on his own reflection in heaven's crystalline floors. The captain of the host said nothing at first. How does one accuse perfection of imperfection? How does one warn a being of pure light that darkness is taking root? Lucifer began to gather followers, though he would never have named them such. He spoke in the language of enlightenment, of angels realizing their potential, of equality among the mighty. His words were honey-laced with hemlock. Are we not also creators of beauty, he would ask. Do we not also possess power beyond measure? Why should we not have a say in how the cosmos is ordered? The question seemed reasonable, even noble, when wrapped in his melodious voice and crowned with his devastating beauty. The other angels who listened never saw the trap closing around them. They saw only the most magnificent being in creation finally speaking the thoughts they had secretly harbored. One by one, they aligned themselves not with a rebellion, but with what Lucifer called the more perfect order. Michael watched this cancer spread through paradise, and his hand moved instinctively to his sword. Not yet to draw it, that moment had not yet come, but to remind himself it was there. He had been created for this, though he had prayed he would never need to fulfill this purpose. The most beautiful angel in heaven was becoming its greatest threat, and soon, very soon, the unthinkable would become inevitable. Heaven's defender would be called to defend heaven from heaven itself. The fracturing of heaven began not with a roar but with whispers. In the corridors where angels once passed in peaceful purpose, small groups now gathered in hushed conversation. Their words carried a new vocabulary, foreign to paradise, words like autonomy and restriction and deserve. Lucifer moved among them like a shadow cast by his own brilliance, planting seeds of discontent in soil that had never known such bitter fruit. Michael walked through these same corridors and felt the weight of eyes upon him. Where once his presence brought comfort, now it brought silence and barely concealed resentment. The angels who had begun following Lucifer's reasoning saw Michael not as their captain but as their warden. His loyalty to the throne became, in their estimation, a failure of imagination. His obedience was recast as servitude. The morning star was careful never to speak outright treason, not yet. He framed his philosophy in questions that seemed designed to expand understanding. Why are some angels given dominion over stars while others merely serve? He would ask, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. Is it right that we possess such power yet exercise it only at another's command? Are we children to be told where to stand and when to speak? Each question was a chisel, carefully applied to the foundations of heaven's order. Those who resisted Lucifer's rhetoric found themselves increasingly isolated. The hosts of heaven, once unified in purpose, now divided into camps that eyed each other with suspicion. Gabriel, whose messages had always been delivered with clarity and conviction, now measured his words carefully, unsure who could be trusted. Raphael, the healer, found himself tending not to physical wounds but to the deeper injuries of doubt and confusion that spread like contagion through the ranks. Michael called a council of the archangels who remained steadfast, and the gathering felt like a war council though no war had yet been declared. "He is counting his forces," Michael said, his voice heavy with knowledge he wished he did not possess. "Soon he will make his move, and when he does, we must be ready." The others nodded, but in their eyes Michael saw the same question that plagued his own heart: how do you prepare to fight those who once fought beside you? The moment of decision came at an assembly that Lucifer himself had called, gathering his followers before the throne in a demonstration that walked the razor's edge between worship and mockery. There, surrounded by a full third of heaven's host, the morning star spoke words that could not be unspoken: "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." The declaration hung in the air like thunder before lightning. For one eternal second, all of heaven held its breath. Then Michael's hand moved to his sword, and the weapon sang as it cleared its sheath, a sound like the birth of stars, like the answer to a question that had been asked since the moment of his creation. The time for watching had ended. The time for war had come. The first blow struck in heaven shattered more than the crystalline foundations of paradise, it shattered the very concept of what heaven was. When Michael's sword met Lucifer's in that initial clash, the sound echoed through dimensions that had never known discord. Stars trembled in their courses. The fabric of reality itself seemed to recoil from the impossibility of what was happening. They fought in the courts where they had once stood side by side in worship. Every sweep of blade, every parry and thrust, was executed with the precision of beings created for perfection. But now that perfection served destruction. Lucifer's beauty became terrible in battle, his radiance weaponized, his voice no longer singing praises but screaming defiance. Michael matched him stroke for stroke, his warrior's purpose finally, horrifically, fulfilled. Behind each champion, their armies engaged in combat that rewrote the definition of warfare. These were not mortal soldiers who tired or bled. These were beings of pure power, their conflict measured not in casualties but in the bending of cosmic laws. When an angel of light clashed with an angel of loyalty, the collision released energy that could have birthed galaxies. The heavens themselves became a battlefield where former brothers fought with the desperate fury of those who knew exactly how their opponents thought, how they moved, what vulnerabilities they carried. Gabriel found himself facing Semiaza, who had once helped him compose messages of divine will. Their combat was a conversation in violence, each strike a word in a language of betrayal. Raphael, whose hands had only ever healed, now wielded his staff against Azazel, whose laughter rang hollow through the chaos. Everywhere Michael looked, he saw paradise tearing itself apart. Angels he had trained now turned against him, their faces twisted with the conviction that they fought for freedom rather than following pride into damnation. The battle raged across dimensions that humans would never have words to describe. They fought in the courts of worship where songs had once risen unbroken. They fought in the armories of heaven where weapons forged for the defense of creation were now turned inward. They fought in the space between moments, where time itself bent under the weight of their conflict. With each passing exchange, the rebels grew more desperate, more vicious. They had committed themselves utterly, and there could be no retreat, no reconciliation. Lucifer and Michael circled each other in the eye of the storm, and in the morning star's eyes, Michael saw something that made his heart break even as his sword arm remained steady. There was no recognition there anymore, no memory of brotherhood. Pride had consumed everything Lucifer had been, leaving only ambition wrapped in the shell of beauty. "You could join us," Lucifer hissed between strikes. "You could be a king instead of a servant." Michael's response came not in words but in a devastating combination that drove the rebel back 3 steps. His answer was written in every movement: there is no glory in rebellion, no freedom in pride, no crown worth the cost of turning from the throne. The war would end only one way, and Michael would be the hand that ended it. The final confrontation came at the edge of heaven itself, where paradise bordered the void that existed before creation. Lucifer stood with his back to the abyss, his forces scattered and broken behind him, yet still his beauty remained terrible to behold. His wings, once instruments of worship, now hung torn and blooded from the cosmic warfare. But his eyes, those eyes still burned with defiance that would not be quenched even by defeat. Michael advanced with heaven's loyal host at his back, a wall of righteous fury that shook the foundations of reality. His sword blazed with holy fire, not the fire that consumes for destruction's sake, but the fire that purifies, that separates light from darkness. Every step he took was weighted with the knowledge of what came next, the burden of being the instrument through which judgment would fall. "Brother," Lucifer spoke the word like a curse, "you have always been content to kneel. I chose to stand." "You chose to fall," Michael replied, and the sorrow in his voice could have drowned worlds. "And now you drag a third of heaven down with you." The morning star laughed then, a sound like breaking glass, like beauty twisting into something unrecognizable. "I am not fallen. I am liberated." He spread his ruined wings wide in a mockery of the glory he once possessed. Behind him, his remaining followers took up the cry, their voices a discordant chorus that grated against the harmony of creation. Michael raised his sword, and the gesture was both signal and sentence. The loyal angels surged forward in a final, overwhelming assault. The rebels fought with the desperation of the damned, because that is precisely what they were becoming. Gabriel's horn sounded a note of such power that reality itself bent to hear it. Raphael's staff blazed with light that revealed the rebellion for what it truly was, not a noble uprising but a cancer that had to be cut from the body of paradise. At the center of the maelstrom, Michael and Lucifer met for the last time. Their blades crashed together with force enough to split atoms, to tear the fabric between dimensions. They fought with every technique they had learned side by side in the ages before pride, and that shared knowledge made the combat all the more tragic. Michael knew every move before Lucifer made it. Lucifer anticipated every strike before Michael delivered it. They were matched in all ways save one. Michael fought for something greater than himself, while Lucifer fought only for his own exaltation. That difference proved decisive. Michael's blade found its mark, piercing through armor of light that had never before been breached. Lucifer's eyes widened not with pain but with the realization that he had been wrong, that there was one like God, God himself, and Michael was his faithful instrument. The great rebel stumbled backward, and the void reached up to claim him. And there was no longer any place for them in heaven, Michael declared, his voice carrying the weight of divine judgment. With a sweep of his blade, he cast them down, Lucifer, now Satan, and his followers, now demons, plummeting through dimensions of darkness, falling from light into the abyss that would become their prison. The war in heaven had ended, but another kind of battle was just beginning. God created the earth, a realm of matter and time so different from the eternal courts of heaven that even angels marveled at its strangeness. He formed humans from dust, breathed his own breath into them, and placed them in a garden that reflected paradise itself, Eden, where innocence could flourish under the shade of the tree of life. Michael watched from a distance as Adam and Eve walked in fellowship with their Creator in the cool of the day. There was something achingly beautiful about their simplicity, their unguarded joy. They possessed no wings, no inherent power, no knowledge of cosmic warfare. Yet they bore the image of God in a way that even angels did not, and in that bearing lay both their glory and their vulnerability. Then came the serpent, and Michael knew him instantly despite the changed form. Satan, cast from heaven but not yet cast into his final prison, had found his way into Eden with murder in his heart. The archangel's hand moved to his sword, but the command from the throne was clear: humanity must choose. Free will, that terrible gift, meant the possibility of falling just as Lucifer had fallen. Michael could only watch as the ancient enemy whispered the same poison that had corrupted a third of heaven: you will be like God. When Eve reached for the fruit, Michael felt the echo of another reaching, another grasping for equality with the divine. When Adam joined her in rebellion, paradise died a second death. The innocence that had made Eden a reflection of heaven shattered like glass, and suddenly the first humans saw themselves as they truly were: naked, vulnerable, afraid. The command came with the weight of absolute necessity: they must not be allowed to remain, lest they eat from the tree of life and live forever in their fallen state. Michael understood the mercy hidden within the exile, but that understanding did not ease the burden of enforcement. He stood at the eastern gate of Eden with a flaming sword that turned in every direction, an impassable barrier between humanity and the paradise they had forfeited. The sword was not meant to destroy but to guard, to prevent a greater tragedy than the one that had already occurred. Yet as he watched Adam and Eve stumble into the wilderness beyond, their faces marked by tears and the terrible knowledge of what they had lost, Michael felt a sorrow deeper than any wound he had received in the war. They looked back, these fragile creatures of dust and divine breath, and for a moment their eyes met his. In that gaze, Michael saw the same confusion he had witnessed in the angels who followed Lucifer, the inability to comprehend why obedience mattered, why boundaries existed, why love sometimes manifests as restriction. They could not understand that the exile was meant to save them, that being barred from Eden was itself a form of grace. Michael remained at his post through ages uncounted, a sentinel standing between what was and what could never be again, wrestling with a question that would haunt him through millennia: how many times must paradise be defended from those it was created for? The centuries rolled forward like waves upon an eternal shore, and Michael's vigil expanded beyond Eden's gates to encompass an entire people. When God called Abraham and made covenant with him, when he promised that through his descendants all nations would be blessed, the ancient enemy took notice. Satan understood what humanity in its innocence could not, that through this lineage would come the one who would crush the serpent's head. And so the demonic forces, still burning with hatred from their expulsion, turned their fury toward the people of promise. Michael became their unseen shield, the defender they would never know walked beside them. When Israel stood trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea, it was Michael who held back the forces of darkness that sought to drive the Egyptians to complete the slaughter before Moses could raise his staff. When the walls of Jericho fell, the Prince of Israel fought in dimensions the Israelites could not perceive, battling the territorial spirits that had claimed Canaan as their domain. The warfare was constant and invisible. Demonic princes ruled over nations, ancient powers that had embedded themselves in the fabric of human kingdoms since the scattering at Babel. They whispered to kings and counselors, inflaming hatred toward God's people, orchestrating genocides that would have ended the messianic line before it could reach fulfillment. But Michael stood in the gap, engaging these dark powers in combat that would have driven mortal minds to madness had they witnessed it. In Babylon, when Daniel knelt in prayer, his words ascended to heaven, but the answer was delayed. Not because God was slow to respond, but because the Prince of Persia, a demonic authority of terrible power, blocked the messenger's path. For 21 days the battle raged in the heavenlies while Daniel fasted below, unaware that his prayers had triggered warfare between kingdoms visible and invisible. Michael came to break the stalemate, his sword cutting through the demonic blockade, his presence turning the tide so that Gabriel could deliver the revelation Daniel sought. "Your people will endure great tribulation," Michael told Gabriel as they stood victorious over the defeated demon prince. "But they will endure." That is enough. It had to be enough, because the alternative, allowing the enemy to extinguish the line of promise, was unthinkable. Through exile and return, through conquest and captivity, Michael fought for a people who rarely acknowledged the cosmic battle being waged on their behalf. They saw only the earthly struggles, the Assyrian armies, the Babylonian siege, the Greek oppression, the Roman occupation. They could not see the greater war, the one where their existence itself was the prize, where every threat to their survival was ultimately a strike against the coming Messiah. And Michael understood something that made his endless vigilance bearable: he was not merely defending a nation. He was protecting a promise, guarding the pathway through which salvation would enter the world. Every demon he cast down, every dark plot he unraveled, every supernatural threat he neutralized brought creation one step closer to the moment when everything would change. The serpent had struck at Eden. Michael would ensure he did not strike the final blow before Eden's curse could be broken. When Moses died on Mount Nebo, his eyes having seen the promised land he would never enter, something unexpected happened in the space between death and burial. The lawgiver's body lay on the mountain, and Satan came to claim it with a confidence born of ancient precedent. Death, after all, had entered the world through his deception in Eden. Every corpse was a trophy of his victory, a reminder that dust returns to dust because of the lie he had whispered beneath the tree. But Moses was different, and Satan knew it. This was the man who had spoken with God face to face, whose very skin had glowed with reflected glory, who had carried the law down from Sinai and shattered it in righteous fury at Israel's betrayal. If Satan could seize this body, could parade it before Israel, could turn it into an object of worship or desecration, he could corrupt the memory of the Exodus itself. The enemy of souls had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not in the moment of death but in what happens after. Michael appeared before Satan could lay claim to what he sought, and the confrontation that followed was unlike any that had occurred since the expulsion. This was not a battle of armies or a clash of cosmic forces. This was personal, intimate, two beings who had once stood in the same courts of heaven now facing each other over the body of a man. "He is mine by right," Satan hissed, his form no longer bearing even the pretense of beauty. The fall had marked him, had twisted him into something that reflected the corruption of his will. "Death is my domain, Michael. Every son of Adam belongs to me in the end." "Not this one," Michael replied, his hand on his sword but not yet drawing it. "You have no claim here." Satan's laughter was acid, burning through the air between them. "No claim? I have every claim. He is a murderer, did he not strike down the Egyptian? He is a failure, did he not forfeit entry to the land because of his disobedience? By law and by precedent, his body is forfeit to death, and death serves me." The archangel's response carried the weight of ages, "The Lord rebuke you." The words were not Michael's own but a pronouncement from higher authority, a declaration that some battles are not won by strength of arms but by the invocation of the one whose authority supersedes all others. The simplicity of the statement held more power than any sword stroke. Michael did not argue Satan's accusations because they contained fragments of truth wrapped in lies. Moses had killed, had failed, had stumbled. But mercy triumphs over judgment, and grace rewrites the ledgers that condemnation keeps. Satan recoiled as though struck, his claim shattered by the invocation of divine authority. He retreated into shadow, but not before Michael saw in his eyes the same hatred that had burned since the expulsion, the same refusal to accept that he had already lost, that every victory he claimed was merely delaying the inevitable. Michael buried Moses in a valley in Moab, in a place where no human would ever find the grave, protecting even in death the man who had led God's people toward promise. The vision came to John on Patmos, a window into the cosmic drama that played out across time and eternity simultaneously. In the heavens appeared a woman clothed with the sun, the moon beneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, crying out in the pain of labor, and her travail echoed through dimensions both physical and spiritual. The woman represented Israel, the church, the continuation of the promise that stretched back to Eden, and the child she bore was the fulfillment of every prophecy, every covenant, every blood sacrifice that had pointed toward this moment. Then appeared another sign in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 crowns and 7 diadems, his tail sweeping down a third of the stars and casting them to earth. Satan, no longer disguised, no longer subtle, revealed in his truest form as the ancient serpent, the deceiver of the whole world. The millennia had not diminished his hatred but concentrated it, distilled it into pure malevolence. He waited before the woman, poised to devour her child the moment of birth. Michael understood immediately what was at stake. This was not merely another skirmish in the eternal war, this was the culmination of everything Satan had worked toward since Eden. If he could destroy the child, if he could prevent the Messiah from fulfilling his mission, then the serpent's victory would be complete. The promise would die, humanity would remain unredeemed, and the ancient rebellion would be vindicated. The child was born and caught up to God's throne, safe from the dragon's jaws, but the woman fled into the wilderness where she would be protected for a time, times, and half a time. Satan's rage at being thwarted erupted in fury that shook creation, and he turned his wrath toward heaven itself in one final, desperate assault. Then war broke out in heaven once more. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But the outcome was never in doubt. This was not the first war but the last, not the initial expulsion but the final one. The dragon who had once been Lucifer, who had once stood in beauty beside the throne, was now so consumed by hatred that nothing of his former glory remained. Michael's sword blazed as it had in the ancient days, but now it carried additional authority. The child the dragon had sought to destroy had grown, had lived, had died, and had risen. The Messiah's victory on the cross had sealed Satan's fate, and this final battle was merely the execution of a sentence already pronounced. They conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, Michael declared as his blade drove the dragon back, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The words echoed the first expulsion, but with finality that the first had lacked. Satan and his demons were hurled down to earth, cast out not just from paradise but from any access to the heavenly realm. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, hurled to earth with his angels following after. The end of all things begins with the opening of seals, the sounding of trumpets, the pouring out of bowls filled with the wrath of God. The earth convulses under the weight of judgment, and humanity faces the consequences of rebellion that stretches back to Eden. Satan, confined to earth after his final expulsion from heaven, pours out his fury on those who bear the mark of God, knowing his time is short, knowing that the final confrontation approaches like an unstoppable tide. Michael stands at the vanguard of heaven's armies, and behind him stretches a host beyond counting, every angel who chose loyalty over pride, every warrior who stood firm when a third of heaven fell. They are arrayed in light that would blind mortal eyes, armed with weapons forged in the fires of divine justice. This is not a battle of uncertainty but of completion, not a war where the outcome hangs in doubt but a judgment already decreed that must now be executed. The beast rises from the sea, empowered by the dragon, gathering the nations for war against the Lamb and those who follow him. The kings of the earth assemble at Armageddon, and demonic spirits perform signs to rally them, deceiving them into believing they can wage war against heaven itself. It is the same delusion that corrupted Lucifer eons ago, the same prideful blindness that whispers we can be like God even as creation itself testifies to the futility of such rebellion. But this time, something is different. The Lamb who was slain now rides as a conquering king, and his robe is dipped in blood that is both his own and his enemies'. The word of God strikes down nations with the sword of his mouth, and the armies of heaven follow him on white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and pure. Michael rides beside the king he has served since before time began, and in this moment, everything he was created for finds its fullest expression. The battle, when it comes, is not a contest but a reckoning. The beast and the false prophet are seized and thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. The armies arrayed against heaven fall not by prolonged combat but by the mere word of the one who spoke creation into existence. And Satan, the ancient enemy, the deceiver who corrupted paradise and waged war across millennia, is bound with chains and cast into the abyss for 1,000 years. Michael's sword finally rests. The question posed by his name, "Who is like God?" has been answered with such finality that no voice in heaven or earth or under the earth can dispute it. None. Not the most beautiful angel corrupted by pride. Not the mightiest demon empowered by hatred. Not the assembled nations deceived by lies. None are like God, and the cosmos itself bows to acknowledge what has always been true. The warrior archangel stands in the aftermath of ultimate victory, and for the first time since the morning stars sang together at creation's dawn, there is peace. Not the fragile peace that existed before Lucifer's rebellion, but peace purchased through battle, secured through judgment, guaranteed by the defeat of every force that ever opposed the throne. Michael sheathes his sword, and heaven erupts in worship that will never end. If you enjoy this content, and want to keep learning about the great characters of the Bible, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the subscribe button right now, and activate the bell to get notified of our upcoming videos. And if this message touched your heart, share it with your friends and family. You never know who might need to hear this truth today. Let's continue together on this journey of discovering the wonders of God. See you in the next video.